More than half a century ago, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, a Baptist preacher from Atlanta lifted his voice and declared a dream to a weary nation. That dream echoed across the marble pillars of history and settled into the hearts of millions. Today, as we stand in a different century yet face familiar storms, we must ask ourselves, does that dream still matter? I stand before you to declare that not only does the dream still matter, the dream is more urgent now than ever before. The dream of equality is not yet fulfilled because equality is more than a declaration written into law. It is a reality that must be experienced in everyday life, though legislation has torn down many of the visible walls of segregation. Invisible barriers still stand in neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, and systems of power. The promise that all people are created equal continues to be challenged by disparities that shape opportunity long before a child learns to read or to dream. In education, inequality persists in ways both subtle and severe. Schools in affluent communities often flourish with advanced resources, smaller class sizes, and expanded opportunities, while schools in under-resourced areas struggle with overcrowded classrooms and limited funding. These differences are not merely logistical, they shape futures. When access to quality education depends on geography or income, the ideal of equal opportunity becomes fragile. The dream envisions classrooms where every child, regardless of race or background, receives the tools to thrive and the encouragement to imagine a boundless future. Economic inequality further reveals how unfinished the journey remains. Many individuals work tirelessly, yet remain trapped in cycles of poverty. Wages for some fail to reflect the dignity of their labor, and wealth gaps continue to separate communities along racial and social lines. Generational wealth, home ownership, and access to capital often follow patterns rooted in historical injustice. While progress has been made, the lingering effects of discrimination in housing, employment, and lending practices continue to shape economic outcomes. Equality requires more than access to jobs. It requires fair pay, upward mobility, and equitable access to resources that build stability and security. The justice system also reflects disparities that complicate the promise of equality. Communities of color frequently experience disproportionate rates of policing and incarceration. Trust between citizens and institutions can erode when fairness appears inconsistent. True equality demands a justice system that protects without prejudice and serves without bias. It calls for transparency, accountability, and reform that affirm the value of every human life. Healthcare disparities further underscore the unfinished work. Access to quality medical care, preventative services, and healthy living environments often correlates with socioeconomic status. Higher rates of chronic illness and lower life expectancy in marginalized communities reveal structural inequities that cannot be ignored. Equality in healthcare means not only treatment but prevention, education, and access to safe conditions that support well-being. Social and cultural representation also shape the lived experience of equality. Media portrayals, leadership representation, and access to positions of influence contribute to whose voices are amplified and whose are overlooked. When certain groups remain underrepresented in boardrooms, government offices, and cultural institutions, equality remains aspirational rather than actualized. Inclusion strengthens democracy by ensuring diverse perspectives shape decisions that affect all. The persistence of bias, whether explicit or implicit, continues to influence interactions and opportunities. Prejudice may no longer be codified in law, yet it can linger in assumptions, hiring practices, and social dynamics. Overcoming these patterns requires both structural reform and personal introspection. Equality demands a transformation of systems and hearts alike. The dream of equality envisions a society where identity does not predict destiny, where justice is consistent and where opportunity is genuinely shared. It acknowledges progress without ignoring present challenges and calls for sustained commitment to fairness in every sphere of life. The unfinished nature of this dream is not a testament to failure, but a reminder of responsibility, urging continuous action, vigilance, and courage in the pursuit of a more just and equitable society. The dream demands courageous love, not hatred, because hatred has never possessed the power to heal a wounded society. Hatred may shout loudly, but it cannot build bridges between divided hearts. It may stir emotions, but it cannot produce justice rooted in dignity and mutual respect. The dream envisions transformation, and transformation requires a force stronger than anger. Courageous love is not passive, nor is it weak. It is a deliberate and disciplined choice to confront injustice without surrendering to bitterness. Courageous love begins with recognizing the humanity of others, even when disagreements run deep. In times of division, it is easy to retreat into suspicion and resentment. Fear can persuade communities to see neighbors as threats rather than partners. Yet the dream calls for something higher, the willingness to stand firm in conviction while refusing to dehumanize. Love does not ignore wrongdoing. Instead, it confronts it with moral clarity and a steadfast commitment to reconciliation. It insists that justice and compassion are not opposites but companions. Throughout struggles for civil rights and social change, hatred has often been presented as a tempting response to oppression. Pain can harden the heart, and injustice can provoke outrage. However, responding to cruelty with cruelty only deepens wounds. Hatred multiplies hostility, creating cycles that entrench division. Courageous love interrupts those cycles. It declares that the goal is not to defeat an enemy, but to win over a brother or sister. It seeks not humiliation, but restoration. Courageous love also requires bravery because it exposes vulnerability. To love in the face of hostility is to risk misunderstanding, rejection, and even sacrifice. It demands patience when progress seems slow and resilience when setbacks occur. Yet this form of love is rooted in strength, not fragility. It draws from an inner conviction that every person carries inherent worth. By affirming that worth, even amid conflict, courageous love challenges systems and attitudes that deny it. The dream demands love in public life as well as in private relationships. Political discourse often rewards outrage and sharp division. Social media amplifies extremes and magnifies anger. In such an environment, courageous love may appear countercultural. It requires listening across differences, engaging respectfully, and seeking common ground without compromising principles. It encourages leaders and citizens alike to pursue policies that uplift rather than marginalize. Moreover, courageous love does not excuse injustice or accept inequality. It fuels activism and inspires reform. Love for humanity compels action against discrimination, poverty, and violence. It motivates individuals to march, vote, organize, and advocate. Unlike hatred, which seeks to tear down, love seeks to rebuild and renew. It understands that sustainable progress emerges from empathy and collaboration rather than domination. The dream envisions communities where conflicts are addressed with honesty and compassion, where disagreements do not dissolve into contempt, and where diversity becomes a source of strength rather than suspicion. Courageous love invites individuals to examine their own biases and to extend grace even when it feels undeserved. It asks for perseverance in dialogue and faith in the possibility of change. By choosing love over hatred, society moves closer to a justice that uplifts every voice and honors the shared destiny that binds humanity together. The dream calls for economic justice because freedom without opportunity is incomplete. Political rights and legal protections hold great value, yet they cannot fully flourish where poverty restricts possibility. Economic justice recognizes that dignity is tied not only to civil liberties, but also to access to meaningful work, fair wages, and the resources necessary for a stable life. When individuals labor tirelessly, yet remain unable to provide housing, health care, and education for their families, the promise of equality feels distant rather than tangible. Economic systems shape daily realities. The availability of jobs, the fairness of compensation, and the security of working conditions influence whether communities thrive or struggle. The dream envisions a society where work is honored with wages that reflect its worth. It challenges conditions in which full-time employment still leaves families below the poverty line. Justice in the economy means that prosperity is not reserved for a privileged few, but shared broadly across society. Wealth disparities often mirror historical inequalities. Generations affected by discriminatory housing practices, unequal education, and limited access to credit continue to feel those consequences. The accumulation of wealth is not solely the result of individual effort. It is also shaped by policy and opportunity. Economic justice requires acknowledging how past injustices have structured present realities. It calls for reforms that expand access to home ownership, entrepreneurship, and financial literacy, ensuring that opportunity is not predetermined by race or background. The dream also recognizes the importance of safe and dignified working conditions. Labor is more than a transaction. It is an expression of human contribution. Workers deserve protection from exploitation and discrimination. They deserve the right to organize, to advocate for fair treatment, and to participate in decisions that affect their livelihoods. Economic justice affirms that productivity should not come at the expense of humanity. Access to quality education and vocational training is another cornerstone of economic justice. Without equitable education, the pathway to economic mobility narrows. When schools in underserved communities lack resources, students may face barriers long before entering the workforce. The dream envisions investments in education that prepare every individual for meaningful participation in the economy. It understands that talent is universal, even when opportunity is not. Healthcare access also intersects with economic fairness. Illness without affordable care can devastate families financially, trapping them in cycles of debt. Economic justice seeks systems that prevent medical hardship from becoming economic catastrophe. It emphasizes preventive care, community health resources, and policies that shield vulnerable populations from disproportionate burdens. Entrepreneurship and innovation further illustrate the need for equitable access to capital. Small businesses often serve as engines of community growth, yet barriers to funding can limit who participates in economic expansion. The dream encourages inclusive economic development that empowers local communities and supports diverse leadership in business sectors. Ultimately, economic justice frames prosperity as a shared endeavor. It calls for policies that balance growth with fairness, competition with compassion, and ambition with accountability. It challenges complacency in the face of stark inequality and urges collective responsibility for creating systems that uplift rather than exclude. The dream invites citizens, leaders, and institutions to examine how economic structures affect the most vulnerable and to pursue reforms that widen the circle of opportunity, strengthen communities, and affirm the inherent worth of every worker and every family striving for stability and hope. The dream belongs to every generation because justice is not a single achievement fixed in time, but a living commitment that must be renewed by those who inherit it. Each era faces its own challenges, shaped by changing social conditions, new technologies, and evolving understandings of equality. While the language of the dream may remain constant, its application requires fresh courage and imagination. No generation can rely solely on the victories of the past, for progress that is not protected and expanded can gradually erode. History demonstrates that movements for freedom are sustained by ordinary people who choose to act in extraordinary ways. Those who marched, organized, and sacrificed in earlier decades did not do so for applause. They acted with faith that future generations would continue the work. The rights secured through protest and perseverance were entrusted to young people who would one day shape classrooms, boardrooms, courts, and communities. In this sense, the dream is a baton passed from hand to hand, requiring steady resolve from each successor. Every generation encounters unique forms of injustice. While past struggles centered on dismantling overt segregation and discriminatory laws, contemporary challenges may appear in subtler patterns such as digital misinformation, systemic bias, or economic displacement. Young leaders today navigate a world interconnected by technology, where voices can reach global audiences in seconds. This connectivity creates both opportunity and responsibility. The dream calls on new generations to use their platforms not for division, but for awareness, advocacy, and constructive change. Education plays a crucial role in transmitting the dream across time. Learning about past struggles fosters gratitude and perspective, reminding students that rights enjoyed today were often hard-won. Yet education must also inspire innovation rather than nostalgia. It should encourage critical thinking about present inequities and empower youth to imagine solutions that reflect current realities. When students understand the sacrifices behind civil liberties, they are more likely to defend and extend them. The dream belonging to every generation also implies shared ownership. It is not confined to activists or public figures, but rests within families, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Parents teach values of fairness and empathy. Teachers model inclusion. Community leaders cultivate dialogue. Collective participation strengthens democratic institutions and ensures that progress is not limited to symbolic gestures, but rooted in sustained engagement. Moreover, generational stewardship requires adaptability. Strategies that succeeded in one era may require revision in another. Peaceful protest, civic participation, policy reform, and grassroots organizing remain vital tools, yet their forms evolve. The dream challenges each generation to discern how best to pursue justice within its context, balancing respect for tradition with openness to new approaches. Intergenerational dialogue enriches this process. Elders carry wisdom shaped by lived experience, while youth contribute creativity and urgency. Collaboration across age groups prevents isolation and fosters continuity. When generations listen to one another, they strengthen the movement for equality and broaden its perspective. The dream's endurance depends on vigilance. Complacency can weaken progress, and indifference can allow inequities to persist unchecked. Each generation must examine its role in either sustaining or neglecting justice. By embracing responsibility rather than assuming completion, societies nurture resilience and moral clarity. The dream lives not in monuments or anniversaries, but in daily choices, civic participation, and the willingness of every new generation to confront injustice with determination and hope. The dream requires action, not complacency, because justice does not advance on its own. Progress is never automatic. It is the result of intentional effort, collective courage, and sustained commitment. When individuals assume that equality has already been secured, they risk overlooking the subtle and persistent forms of injustice that remain embedded in institutions and attitudes. Complacency creates the illusion of completion, while action acknowledges that the work of building a fair society is ongoing. Complacency often grows out of comfort. When laws change and visible barriers fall, it can appear that the mission has been accomplished. Yet the dream envisions more than symbolic victories. It calls for transformation in lived experience. Disparities in education, income, healthcare, and representation remind society that legal equality does not automatically produce practical equity. Action means examining outcomes, not just intentions, and responding when patterns reveal imbalance. Civic participation is a central expression of this action. Voting, community organizing, public service, and advocacy are tools through which citizens influence the direction of their societies. Democracy depends on engagement rather than passivity. When people withdraw from civic life, decisions are shaped by a narrower set of voices. The dream urges widespread participation so that policies reflect the needs and aspirations of diverse communities. Action also requires dialogue. Difficult conversations about race, inequality, and opportunity cannot be avoided if meaningful change is to occur. Silence may feel safer than confrontation, yet silence often protects the status quo. Engaging respectfully across differences fosters understanding and exposes areas where reform is needed. Constructive dialogue builds bridges while still challenging injustice. Economic and social reforms demand organized effort. Individuals working alone may feel powerless, but collective action amplifies impact. Grassroots movements, non-profit organizations, faith communities, and labor groups have historically shaped policy and public consciousness. The dream calls for collaboration across sectors, recognizing that systemic change rarely emerges from isolated gestures. Sustained advocacy ensures that issues remain visible and that leaders are held accountable. Personal responsibility complements public engagement. Action is not limited to large-scale demonstrations. It includes daily decisions that reflect fairness and empathy, employers who evaluate hiring practices, educators who address bias in classrooms, and neighbors who support inclusive initiatives all contribute to the realization of the dream. Small, consistent acts reinforce broader reforms and cultivate a culture of equity. Complacency can also appear as cynicism. Some may believe that change is too slow or too difficult to pursue, yet resignation surrenders potential before it is realized. The dream requires resilience in the face of setbacks. Historical progress has often unfolded gradually, marked by obstacles and opposition. Action persists despite these challenges, guided by the conviction that incremental improvements accumulate into lasting transformation. Accountability further distinguishes action from complacency. Institutions must assess whether policies achieve equitable outcomes and adjust when they do not. Transparency and data-driven evaluation strengthen trust and reveal areas needing attention. The dream encourages vigilance, urging society to measure success not by rhetoric but by tangible improvements in opportunity and well-being. Ultimately, action reflects belief in the possibility of a more just future. It transforms hope from sentiment into strategy and aspiration into implementation. The dream thrives when individuals refuse indifference and choose engagement, when communities move beyond acknowledgement of problems to the pursuit of solutions, and when commitment replaces comfort as the guiding force of social progress. The dream is rooted in hope and faith because without them, the struggle for justice would lose its sustaining power. Hope is not naive optimism that ignores hardship. It is a disciplined belief that change is possible even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Faith is not passive acceptance. It is active trust that moral effort carries meaning and that perseverance can bend history toward fairness. Together, hope and faith provide the inner strength required to confront injustice without surrendering to despair. Throughout movements for civil rights and human dignity, hope has functioned as a guiding light in moments of uncertainty. When progress appeared slow and opposition fierce, Hope reminded communities that temporary setbacks do not define ultimate outcomes. It affirmed that social transformation often unfolds gradually, shaped by countless acts of courage that accumulate over time. Without hope, the sacrifices demanded by reform would feel unbearable. With hope, those sacrifices gain purpose and direction. Faith deepens this resilience by grounding action in moral conviction. It affirms that every human being possesses inherent worth, independent of status or circumstance. This conviction sustains advocates who challenge inequality, reminding them that their efforts reflect a larger moral framework. Faith in justice does not deny present struggles. It interprets them as chapters in a longer narrative. It enables individuals to endure criticism, misunderstanding, and hardship while remaining committed to nonviolence and integrity. Hope and faith also protect against bitterness. In the face of discrimination or exclusion, resentment can take root easily. Yet the dream insists that transformation requires hearts that remain open. Hope envisions reconciliation, and faith trusts that former adversaries can become partners in building a more inclusive society. This perspective does not minimize harm. Rather, it insists that healing is possible. It encourages dialogue where others expect division and seeks restoration where others anticipate permanent fracture. The dream's foundation in hope influences public engagement as well. Communities animated by hope are more likely to participate in civic life, advocate for reform, and invest in long-term solutions. Despair can paralyze action, but hope energizes it. It transforms grievances into organized efforts and frustration into constructive initiatives. Faith strengthens this process by reminding individuals that moral consistency matters as much as immediate results. In educational settings, hope empowers young people to imagine futures not limited by present obstacles. When students believe their efforts can yield meaningful change, they approach challenges with determination. Faith in their own potential and in the fairness of opportunity fuels persistence. The dream encourages institutions to cultivate environments where optimism is nurtured alongside critical thinking, reinforcing the belief that improvement is achievable. Hope and faith also shape leadership. Leaders guided by these principles communicate vision rather than fear. They articulate goals that inspire collaboration and trust, even amid disagreement. By emphasizing shared values and collective responsibility, they reinforce the idea that progress depends on unity rather than isolation. Rooted in hope and faith, the dream resists the pull of cynicism. It acknowledges injustice while refusing to grant it permanence. It invites individuals to act with courage because they believe their actions contribute to a broader arc of moral progress. Hope sustains effort, faith grounds conviction, and together they form the spiritual and ethical foundation that keeps the pursuit of equality alive across generations, circumstances, and challenges. In closing, the dream still calls to us. It calls across generations, across neighborhoods, across every barrier that seeks to divide the human family. It reminds us that equality is unfinished, that love must be courageous, that economic justice is essential, that responsibility belongs to every age, that action is required, and that hope and faith must remain our foundation. The dream is not preserved by memory alone. It is preserved by movement. It is strengthened when ordinary people choose fairness over fear, participation over silence, and compassion over hatred. It grows when communities refuse complacency and insist that dignity belongs to all. Each of us stands at a crossroads between indifference and involvement. The future of the dream depends not on grand speeches, but on daily decisions. How we treat one another, how we vote, how we lead, how we serve. The work of justice is not reserved for a few. It is entrusted to all. If we carry the dream forward with courage, discipline, and love, it will continue to illuminate our path. If we nurture it with hope and protect it with action, it will guide us toward a society more aligned with its highest ideals. The dream still matters, and its fulfillment begins with us.